All right, Dean, welcome to the Freedom Pact podcast, my friend.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I'm here.
So the reason I wanted to get you on is over the last year, I've spoken to a few of the guys from SAS who dares wins. So I've got to know Jay Morton, Ollie Ollerton, Mark Billingham
Yeah.
quite well. And those episodes seem to resonate with a lot of people. I think there's a big desire to hear from guys like yourself. And after putting those out, every time we ask via our newsletter, who do you want us to get on? Your name just kept cropping up. And
Great.
finally we meet the demand. Um, so all those people who are listening now have requested you, they know your background. I'm sure they've read your book, but for our audience who may not be familiar with your story, before we jump into the content, could you just give us a quick overview of your military career?
Yeah, so I joined the military at 17. I joined the Royal Engineers. My father was in the Royal Engineers, so I sort of followed that tradition. My first posting went straight out to Germany, ended up playing sport, and I saw myself going down almost like we call them tracksuit soldiers, a career in sport. So I decided to do the All Arms Commando course. Past that, and I spent 8 years with 5/9 Commando, from a sapper all the way through to a sergeant, and then I had to leave. Then I was very fortunate to also spend being an instructor on the Commando course during my time there. I then went to the senior diving school. The Defence Diving School, and I was a senior diving instructor down in Portsmouth. It was that period then I decided to go on selection, but rather than going the normal route from Army to the SAS, because my background is spent in so long with Free Commander Brigade and also being a senior diving instructor, I was very much pulled towards the SBS. So I did selection and became one of the first Army guys to go the non-traditional way to the SBS. And I think actually now, at the time it was quite difficult, as you can imagine, going against the curve and against the grain. You'll get a lot of criticism and obviously a lot of attention on a course where you're supposed to be quite a grey man. But yeah, I was successful, and I think 15% now of the SBS is made up of the Army. So so sort of opened those floodgates, really.
You mentioned there that you joined the Army at just 17 years of age, and I read somewhere online that your father said that you wouldn't last 2 minutes. Well, of course, you went on to complete almost every course available to you at the time. You had a great career. What originally spurred you on to join at 17 years of age? And did those words like, you won't last 2 minutes, what did they do for you? Did they spur you on?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a fireman. That was always my passion as a young boy. I left school in 1993, and there was a huge recession there. It was really difficult to get work at that time. I think, for one fireman application, there was 2,000 CVs going in. So a young boy at 17, there's no way I could compete with that. So I looked at, I went to college, started doing my A-levels and things like that. And then I went down to Newquay, me and my mates, for a summer holiday. Well, it turned from 2 weeks into 6 months. I ended up staying down there, becoming a silver service waiter, and ended up working in a surf shop. And, long before the mobile phones, my father then came looking for me 6 months later, sort of highlighted that I'd ruined my education. What was I going to do? So I sort of said a throwaway comment, said, I'm going to join the Army. And he said, well, you will last 2 minutes. At the time, I was about 5'7" and 9.5 stone, so I could see where he was coming from. But actually, that gave me that fire in the belly to say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll prove you wrong. And that's what it did. And, I always say that there's no point in arguing with someone to your balloon effect. You're not going to change their point of view. The only way you can do that is actually by actions. So I joined at 17. By the age of 21, I was a para commando diver in PTI. I'd done every arduous course within the engineers up until that point. And actually, on reflection, in hindsight, it may have been reverse psychology from him. You just don't know. Yeah, it gave me that extra fire in my belly.
Mm. So what would you say then? I think for a lot of young children, especially in this part of the world, it's almost indoctrinated into you that, you go to school, you get the good grades, you go to university, you get more good grades, you get a 9-to-5 job, You know, if you make more than 20 grand a year, you're considered successful these days. That seems to be the path that's almost given to us, and we think we have to follow in order to be successful. And there's not many people when you're younger in education or institutions telling you that there are other options. What would you say to the kids of today that maybe are too afraid to chase a dream, or too afraid to try anything outside of that norm that they're told is almost the only way forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressures from children nowadays, especially more so from their parents, that they want them to have an education, want them to go to university. But it's like, well, what does that give you? You know, that doesn't give you any life skills. So as I mentioned, by the age of 21, I'd done every arduous course in the military. My friends were still at university at this point, and already I'd had so much life experiences and skills, which are actually transferable. The world's fixated on education. You need to have degrees, but you can't be experienced without experiences. And I'm starting to see a shift really in the fact that, well, I'm a CEO of a security business. When I see CVs in front of me, I ignore the education bit. It's what have you done since then? And I just say to the young kids, carve your own path. Don't worry about what your parents want you to do. You're in charge of your own destiny. But but for me, the successful people I know in the industry didn't go to university. I'm not saying going to university doesn't help you, because there are a lot of successful people out there, but it isn't the be all and end all. We're not, a lot of people are very intelligent, but they just get bored. I'm sure I've got ADD. I'm like, that's why I just, I didn't want to go to college and things like that. I wasn't really interested. I wanted to get out and see the world. So, be in charge of your own destiny. It's very easy to say to you, don't break to peer pressure, but, don't feel that going to university is the answer.
Yeah, I think for me, especially, that resonates with me. I mean, I went to university, I studied, I have a degree in history. And then I come out of university, and my source of income since then was I first became a gym instructor, personal trainer, nothing to do with history. And now my income comes from this podcast. Again, I don't use my history degree, so it's arguably 3 years wasted for me, because at the time I didn't really weigh up. I just thought, everyone in school, the teachers were telling you, what you were good at A level, that's what you should go on to do at university. And I almost felt like it wasn't my decision at the time. And I think that what I'm doing now, all my education has come from life experiences and books more than anything, is reading personal development books. And, that's what my best education has been so far. So for you, what has been your best education? Where do you look for to learn and grow?
Obviously, when I I'm going back to yours, I don't think you've wasted the 3 years. I think when you're 17, 21, 22, you still don't even know what you want to do. And it's unfortunately, the institution feels like you have to have made the decision at that point. So for me, when I joined the army, I thought, well, I'll do 3 years. That's why I joined the Royal Engineers. My father was at, well, do 3 years, get a trade, get something back, and then, helps build your CV. It was only then when I was in there that I saw opportunities. I looked at some of my peers and I was just like, wow. So I used to absorb and to soak all the information from there, hear about their stories, their experiences. And that's what I loved in the military. And that's where I got my education, through others. And also going through it myself. I mentioned you can't be experienced without experiences. It's the military is a business. It's a corporation at the end of the day. And there are so many companies out there trying to replicate, the experiences that the guys and girls get in the military, but you just can't. You have to be in the military to get there. But, I see some guys and girls when they're leaving, and going back to your original one about degrees, they're like, oh, well, I'm going to struggle because I don't have a degree. And I was like, well, no, you don't. But there's so many transferable skills you have and that you've got from being in the military, which resonate with the corporate world. I think nowadays, with the world very going technical, you don't even have to call someone now to order a pizza. It's all online, and people are really struggling or will struggle to communicate one-on-one. And that's what the military does for you. You know, I'm very fortunate I've been able to stand up in front of 10,000 people and guest speak, or in front of 96 students on the All Arms Commander course. I've seen clients I've taken to Libya to do pitches, and these guys are, you know, six-figure sums, being at university and everything else. Put them in an audience of like 10 people and they just crumbled. So it's those transferable skills and life skills that you get that confidence, which no sort of degree or any sort of books can teach you.
Just pulling the thread here then, and it's probably something I suffered with when I came out of university, and I imagine, you know, not just a lot of young people suffer with, but, you know, in every area of life, I maybe you've experienced it yourself, is this idea of comparison. And, you know, they say comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to say don't compare yourself to people, but, you know, for me anyway, when you're coming out of university, you have a degree, and, you know, you don't use that degree, you end up being a gym instructor, and, you know, you're looking at someone else who's come out of university with their degree, they've gone straight into a job. You know, even turning this to you, I think, in a career like the military, I wonder if people are, you know, are often comparing their accolades to each other and thinking, you know, how am I not at this level? What are your opinions on comparison, and do you think it's quite detrimental to our enjoyment of life in the whole?
There's two sides to it. You know, comparison, I used to use it obviously when I was in the military, long before social media. Comparison now with social media is very different from comparison when I was in. Comparison when I was in was looking at others that had done it, and that for me was healthy competition. It was like, well, if they can do it, I'm going to try and do it. So I use that to my advantage. But, you know, whereas now, you know, the youth, you know, they're looking at social media and it's just smoke and mirrors. You know, no one's going to post, you know, sad pictures and things like that. So I always say, don't compare yourselves to people on social media. You're in charge of your own destiny. You know, when I did the bike ride, it was very easy for me to look at other adventure cyclists, but I was like, well, no, they're not me. You know, I know me. So yeah, it has its positives and has its negatives. The positive wise is I use it again as fire in my belly to compete with them.
You mentioned that, you know, you took the decision to apply and go through the selection process, and eventually you joined the SBS. But talk to me about that decision, because, you know, a lot of people at that point would have been content with the career you had, considered themselves successful, but, you know, you wanted to take it that extra step further. Are you the kind of person that's never letting themselves become content, and you're always looking for that next challenge?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot, like I say, I was successful already in the military, and, you know, a lot of people would have been happy with that, you know, but for me, when I'm on my deathbed, I don't want to ask myself, did I give it my all? You know, I don't want to regret that I didn't try it. You know, if I tried it and I failed, then I tried it, rather than saying, well, at least you didn't try it, so you'll never know the outcome. For me, you know, again, I'm very competitive. My father was very competitive, so I had that competitive element in me. But also, you know, selection isn't for everyone, but there were guys that I knew who were capable of passing, but it was the fear of failing, because they'd achieved so much anyway within the airborne and commando units, and they were, you know, reputable figures. They didn't want to then take the risk and the whole pedestal fall beneath them. You know what I mean? So a lot of them don't push themselves further. They get to a comfort zone and they're like, well, I'm happy with this, rather than getting out their comfort zone and putting themselves out there. So that's something I have noticed, because I did notice a few guys like, well, why didn't you do it? And oh, no, you know, and I know now it's because they didn't want to fail. And then, you know, that word failure, me and my wife talked about it yesterday, you know, it's such a negative word that people are so scared of that word, when in fact, every failure is an experience. As long as you learn from that failure and you don't repeat it the next time, then it's just experience. But, you know, everyone's unique. I get that. You know, for me, you know, the extra drive for me on doing that course is when my friends from the SAS were like, you know, what are you doing? You know, why are you doing it? You know, I mean, you know, much to the disgust of them, and which got me extra attention on selection. But for me, I thought, well, no, watch this space.
It's funny you mentioned failure. I mean, that is the exact attitude that I have. And it's funny, my podcast partner and I, we don't do it so much anymore, but there was a point where we loved this idea of failing. And we always used to ask each other at the end of the day. I'd send him a text. I'd say, tell me something you failed at today. And if he couldn't tell me something he failed at, then I'd say, you're not trying enough. And, you know, we mentioned failure there being a massive reason. And with that selection process, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a figure I found online, is that the pass rate is below 5%. And, you know, you would have seen a lot of people on selection that made it and a lot of people that didn't. What are the big main differences you noticed between the people who made it, the elite, and the people who didn't quite make it?
I think because when you start, and I think there was just shy of 200 that started mine, and they're all shapes and sizes. You know, you've got your big guy, you've got your fit guys, and you've got your little skinny grey men and things like that. So it's very difficult at the beginning to, you know, understand who do you think is going to pass and fail. You know, the DS tell you on selection, let us fail you, don't fail yourself. A lot of the guys take themselves off. You know, there's those that generally get injured on the hills phase or whatever, so you're going to get a natural attrition of that. But then when you go to the jungle, you're going to get those guys that are just self-doubting. You know, that I'm not good enough to be here, because they're comparing themselves. It's that comparing. They're comparing themselves with others in the team. But and also the instructors are in your ear. You know, unlike what you see on telly, you know, when they're screaming and shouting. That is the opposite of selection. Obviously, there's a fine line on TV between authenticity and entertainment, and they've gone entertainment. But actually on selection, the instructors will just tell you what to do, and they don't need to repeat it. If they need to repeat it, then, you know, you've highlighted yourself. So, but they will niggle in your ear. They're like, you know, stop what you're doing here. You know, you're not good enough for this. You know, save your time, save your energy, and go home. You know, I remember going to in the jungle, going to one of the ranges, and we just arrived, and one of the instructors just, you know, turned and just started screaming and shouting at me, and he's like, right, if I ever see weapon handling drills like that again, you know, I mean, you'll be off the course. And he was just waiting for a reaction to see how I respond. I hadn't even been on the range yet, but I knew it was mind games, and you sort of know there's going to be mind games on there. But for me, you know, I was happy with that. There are some guys, you know, it sows that seed. I mean, yeah, we're all human. People will mess up at some point, you know what I mean? And they just play on it. I think, oh, you know what I mean? So, so it's strange. It's when you see the guys at the end from the guys at the beginning, you probably wouldn't have been the same people you'd have picked out. You know, they're very, very resilient. Obviously, you know, naturally fit, but very resilient, but also very intelligent as well. Can, you know, take on board information. Doesn't need to be repeated.
You mentioned the one word, resilience. You know, throughout your military career at the elite level, what did it mean to have a relentless mindset? What does that mean to you?
A relentless mindset, you know, for me, you know, when I joined, probably at the beginning, when I joined the military at, you know, 17, you know, 5'7", 9.5, I wasn't that confident. But actually, 10 weeks later, when I passed, you know, I thought, and I was actually, you know, competing. I was actually at the front on PT with some of the other guys. You know, that then gave me built my own self-confidence and built my my mindset. And I thought, well, what next? So then did the PTI course, and actually during this period as well, I'm also growing in height, and I'm starting to grow into a man. So each time I did a course, I got more confident. But not only was I passing, I was either top student or pushing for top student all the time. So that unrelenting pursuit of excellence, if you're going to do something, you give it your 100%. You do it to the best of your ability. Because if you don't then make the grade, but know you've given it your 100%, then you can look yourself in the mirror. And I think that's where some people don't give it their 100%. And then, you know, I've had some friends who, you know, they've taken themselves off selection, and they'll get in touch with me months down the line, like, what was I thinking? And they have to live with that guilt. You know, for me, it's knowing that I won't ever live with guilt.
We mentioned earlier that, you know, some people out there, especially on social media, only like to highlight the good and the glamorous moments. But what I appreciate about you and your story is you're very open about the accident that ended your career. And for those who are unaware, before we get into some questions, could you just sort of highlight that accident in any detail you can to our audience?
Yeah, of course, Dan. Yeah. So obviously I'm now in the special boat service, and I joined at a time, it was on the height of war of terror. We were, probably the busiest time in SF history. You had Iraq, Afghanistan, you had stuff on the east coast of Africa. It was a busy period. And I always say I was like living and breathing, what these kids play on Call of Duty. That was our day job. And so for me, I was at the top, and also I was working with like-minded individuals, guys that were confident in their abilities. And it was healthy competition as well, always to push yourself to try and be better than them, and they would do the opposite. So for me, I was happy. I was in a happy place, and we were just about to go to Afghan on another tour 2 weeks before on a pre-deployment training in Oman. And we were doing a hey-ho jump, which is high altitude, high opening jump. So it's a method of insertion. You exit the aircraft at 15,000 feet, and it's a static light. And unlike free fall, you're still attached to the aircraft. As you exit the aircraft, the parachute will then go tight and open above your head. And you then travel up to 50 kilometers or 30 minutes airtime to the target area. So this is about the fourth jump of the day. And we've done these hundreds of times, and it was the fourth jump of the day, exit the aircraft, normal procedure. But this time my leg, it was a freak accident. My leg got caught in the line above my head. So I'm trying to pull my leg out in time before the parachute opens, and then obviously causes more damage. I couldn't clear it in time. The parachute opened, pulled my leg over my head and to the right. And thankfully my foot got released from the line and my leg wasn't taken completely off. Otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. At 15,000 feet, you're also on the limits of oxygen. So I was vomiting because of the pain. I knew there was a problem straight away, and I was also drifting in and out of consciousness, but no one else in the team was aware there was a situation. So my first aim was to stay with the stick. And obviously in the back of my mind was wondering, how the hell am I going to land this? Because I've only got one leg. And if I mess that up, it could damage the other leg completely as well. So I got to the DZ. I assessed the approach of the other parachutists with the winds, and I did a perfect landing. I actually landed one-legged. But unfortunately, the damage sustained, shortened my career. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus within my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quad. So all the supporting muscles as well. So I had an MRI scan the next day, and then waited for an Aeromed flight. But yeah, you've gone from being at the top of your game, loving life, to all of a sudden reinventing yourself. What now? 16 years in the military. I grew up in a military family. All I knew was that military environment, and it was almost, thank you for your time. You now need to leave, and that was difficult for me. In reflection, it's what's known as an identity crisis. Very common within guys and girls in the military, professional sports athletes, but it's also anyone who works in a close-knit team or environment, for a period of time, and then you have to change that environment. It's called very tribal. You leave one tribe, and it's like, how do I? What other tribe am I now going to go into? And again, obviously I was confident with the skill sets that I learned in the military, those transferable skills. But without sounding like Liam Neeson, the natural progression for people from our background is the private security sector. But yeah, that was, at the time I was also under pressure. My wife was 8 months pregnant. Is like, not only have you just left everything that you ever known behind, how am I now going to support my family, my young family?
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. And, it's something I've spoken to, we've spoken to many guys involved in the military. Obviously the ones I mentioned, and, a few American, General Stanley McChrystal. We've spoken to a few of these guys, and they all talk about this identity crisis. And, like you rightly said, up to that point in your life, that's all you've ever known. You've been, Dean Stott, the military man. But that transition, when you realize that that's not a possibility anymore, your mind must go to some dark places, man.
It does, yeah. You do. I think to add to my pressure was obviously my wife being pregnant. But you hear horror stories of guys and girls when they leave their transition. Some's quite smooth, and some can be quite turbulent. Thankfully for me, my wife is very entrepreneurial. So when you're in the military, they're like your mother, your father. They clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. I didn't know what council tax band I was paying or who provided the heating. I didn't actually care. But now you need to learn about this when you enter the civilian sector. But thankfully for me, my wife did that. She was my military umbrella. She did all that for me. And, I then went into the private security industry, and it wasn't until actually a few years later. So in 2014, I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya on my own, 18 military and 4 diplomats. And they were the sort of jobs I was doing, evacuating people. I was training, the great thing about the security industry is very diverse. One day you could be training the Kurdish Special Forces. Next thing you're taking the UAE Royal Family super yacht from Barcelona to the Maldives. But it came to a point in 2014 when I returned from that evacuation that I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. And again, this was where the pin dropped. I actually hadn't come to terms with the fact that I'd left the military or the special forces, and I was trying to match that adrenaline rush that I had when I was still in, without having to come to terms. So there was sort of 2 stages in my life. There was that identity crisis at the beginning, and I thought, well, for me, it's to excel within the security industry, make a name within the industry, which I then did. But then realized actually that you didn't have that top cover. If it had gone wrong, I didn't have the lads jumping out of planes or helicopters coming to my rescue. So yeah, I think it's chapter 16 in the book. It's called Dead or Divorced. I think that was the stage we are at the moment. But yeah, very common with those in the military is how am I going to reinvent myself? What is my role or purpose now within society? And I think just to add to that, where mine also worked quite quickly, a lot of guys and girls, when they leave, blame the civilian sector, blame the community. They'll always find excuses that, well, they don't understand, or they're always late, and things like that. And there's always these excuses, when in fact, as soon as you realize it's actually us that are unique and we need to fit into their world, not the other way around, then you'll get on a lot better. And some guys and girls really struggle with that.
Interesting. You talk about this private security, and again, this is a theme that crops up a lot with guys from the military. When I spoke to Mark Billy Billingham, he said that, he was so thankful that came into his life. So for you, what was it about the security? Was it having a job with almost, a similar purpose to the military career? Is that what drove you into that industry?
I think it's a similar purpose, but it's also, it's almost, when you're in the military, it's great because, at any time you could be sent off anywhere around the world. Every day is a different day. And that's what I found with the security industry. There's different elements of the security industry. There's those guys that go on rotations that will just, work in Iraq for 3 months, come out and then go back in. Whereas I very much did the ad hoc stuff. So, 1 minute I get a phone call, I'd be in Ghana, or next phone call I'm taking, I'm with Visa World Cup in Brazil. So I made, I was conscious to do that as well. So I had exposure to the whole of the security industry, from the maritime, the surveillance, the coaching, and the close protection. So yeah, it was actually very similar lifestyle of being in the military, but actually I was doing more, probably, more secret jobs in the private security than I was actually in the special forces. You're not governed by that whole, rules and engagement and protocol. Going into Libya the first time within 48 hours, I soon identified that a lot of these security companies, again, smoke and mirrors, were charging 6-figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans, when actually, when you scrape the surface, there was nothing there. So for me, rather than just work in the security industry, I wanted to, get a name within the industry. So I bought 30 weapons on the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt. And I just did my own evacuation plans, made my own reports. And they're the sort of jobs I was doing. But I felt that fire in the belly. I felt like I had a role and a purpose, and I was doing good. I think the private security industry isn't 9 to 5, and that's very relatable to the military, hence natural transition.
A thing that I really admire about yourself, and those who are from a similar career to yourself, you all seem to be what I call comfortable in chaos. And going back to your accident we just talked about, you know, in a moment of pure chaos that would send 99.999% of people into panic and shock and complete mental shutdown, how did you manage to keep level-headed, keep focus, and keep the eye on what needed to be done to get you to safety? Because, you know, like I said, for so many people, they would have panicked and that would have been that.
Yeah, I think, you know, the great thing about the military, you know, we rehearse, we train. You know, you can't train for every scenario, but you know, so when situations like that happen, whether it's parachuting, whether it's underwater, you know, the first thing to do, they always say, is don't panic. It's very easy to say that, but you know what I mean? But again, that whole phrase that you can't be experienced without experiences that I've had before, which helped me in that scenario. You know, I've had 2 malfunctions before parachuting. Before that one, at least I had a canopy above my head. So actually I wasn't that worried. It's when you look up and there is no canopy, that's when you need to worry. And I've been in that scenario before. So for me, it was like, well, quickly assess the situation. That's what we're quite good at, is quickly reading the situation and making a decision. So obviously, yes, my leg's still there, so that's fine. It hasn't been ripped up. I have a canopy. I just need to now land it. So, you know, you sort of control those things. You can't control the uncontrollable. And people who try to do that or get fearful of that, you know what I mean? So you just deal with what's in front of you.
I love the story of how you decided one day you just fancied having a go at breaking a world record. And, you know, I read that, you know, the story behind it was that, you know, your wife almost just threw a Guinness World Record book at you and it went from there. What was the process like of you deciding what record you wanted to break? How did you come to that decision?
So that was more dictated. So I talked about the Canadian Embassy. When I returned from that trip, you know, my wife, as I mentioned, highlighted, I'd only been home 21 days in a year. So something, again, had to change in my life. My wife was a property developer. So she said, look, you know, you come work with me. This is about 5 years now, having left from my injury to this point in my life. And whilst in the security industry, I was so fixated on building up the business and working, I sort of neglected my own physical well-being. So my injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. So I just bought a push bike, just bought one off Amazon, just bought a cyclocross bike off Amazon, and I just cycled to and from the office. It was only about 8 miles there, 8 miles back. But it was the first sort of cardiovascular fitness I'd done in 5 years. And straight away I felt good, you know, I just felt I had a purpose. But you can imagine sat in these architects and planners meetings, I was like, you know, I wasn't really interested. So my wife then said, yes, you need to do something. It was about a month before my 40th birthday. I said, well, I've always fancied a world record. And the question was, well, what in? You know, I should have ate 12 Ferrero Rochers or something. But I said, well, cycling, because I chose cycling because I knew it wasn't having an impact on my injury. My injury wouldn't get in the way of that. I knew I had the endurance, I knew I had the mindset, but I just wasn't a cyclist. So so that's where we came up with the cycling challenge. And then my wife then found, you know, originally I was looking at Cairo to Cape Town, but majority of my private security industry was in Africa. So for me, well, I've ticked that, I've been there, I don't want to do it on a bike. So my wife then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska. And I thought, perfect, you know, there's areas there I've never been to, so there's countries I've never seen before. It ticks all the climates, you know, the jungle, you know, the desert, the Arctic. And so that's what I did. And so having only cycled less than 20 miles, I applied for the world record for Guinness.
Mad, man. And so talk to me about that journey. You know, you mentioned that longest road. What did the days look like for you? Like, what was the slog?
So, you know, going back just slightly, you know, I wasn't a cyclist. You know, I spoke to the previous record holders. They all went north-south. So I decided to go south-north. Only because all their issues were in the south. The world record was 117 days. I was aiming for 110. So I actually had a plan. You know, I wasn't a cyclist. I gave myself a year to train as well. So at the beginning stages, I just put pen to paper, you know, looked at all the potential scenarios, what was in my control, what was out of my control. You know, those controlling the uncontrollables. The uncontrollables were natural disasters, coups, third-party influence. So aimed for 110. So I then put that down, broke each day. So I had each day broken down and how I would do it. But we always say in the military, best plan survives first contact. You know, you didn't expect them to shoot back. So again, I think the success of this was the fact that, again, when situations were coming to me on the road, I was in a position that I could act on it. You know, day 1 to day 7 was 40-mile-an-hour crosswinds. I crashed my bike in Chile. I got food poisoning twice in Peru. You know, all these scenarios that you couldn't factor. You know, I had issues with my support team and things like that as well in the background, managing egos. So so that for me was the hardest slog, was actually dealing with things that weren't part of the challenge. You know, dealing with, you know, social media issues and things like that. You know, I had a role, I had an objective. But for me, I just made sure that I hit my objective. I'm very objective driven. You know, I didn't see it as a 14,000 miles. I saw it as, you know, 4 training sessions a day. And that's what I did. I just did the first 2 hours, had some food and water. I mean, looked at the next 2 hours. I didn't look at the next. So yeah, there were dark days, but for me, I made sure that when I finished my ride for the day, I hit the objective or hit the target or beyond, because then going into the next day, you're in a good mindset, knowing that you're ahead of the curve and you're not behind. So that limited any sort of dark periods for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you at all suffer with any imposter syndrome along the way, or did that planning just prevent that and that doubt creeping into your mind?
What's that? Imposter syndrome? I haven't heard that one. What's that one?
So it's where you almost, you know, you're trying something new and you almost talk yourself into this idea that, you know, you're not good enough at this. So for example, if, you know, when I started this podcast, I might have had imposter syndrome, thinking that, you know, I'm not a podcaster. I've never interviewed anyone before. What business have I got interviewing so-and-so?
Yeah, well, yeah, actually, so my sponsorship marketing team, before we went, the day 1, when we put it all together, did a SWOT analysis, your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And the only weakness that came back was my arrogance towards the cycling community, which I took as a strength. But the imposter syndrome wise, when I was doing the planning, I looked at, you know, all the potential scenarios. I also then looked at the climates and the conditions that I'd be cycling in. So the Atacama Desert is the driest non-popular desert in the world. So it was 47 degrees centigrade when I was there for a week. So for me, to replicate that, I went to Dubai and did heat training there for about 8 hours a day. So I could satisfy myself, well, actually, when it comes to that situation, you're tried and tested. I did the same. You know, the biggest climb on the Tour de France is about 21 to 23 kilometers. My biggest climb was 67 kilometers from sea level to 4,500 meters. So again, I did a 10-hour watt bike session in a simulated room at altitude. So for me, I wasn't then having that imposter syndrome, worrying that, oh, what am I going to be like at heat? What am I going to be like at altitude or in the Arctic? Because I'd already tested that. And the great thing about, you know, for me, for the challenge, the only thing that was going to stop me was my body as well.
Love that. Would you encourage people out there listening now to maybe try something, maybe not a world record attempt or anything of that magnitude, but to scale it to themselves and try something that makes them uncomfortable to try and build that resilience?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. You know, one of the things, so to add to the bike ride, we were also doing it for a mental health campaign. And, you know, we raised over £900,000, which, you know, I'm more impressed about with the bike ride. But I remember sitting down with the foundation and they're like, well, what is the message you're promoting? I said, well, physical activity helps your mental state. And they said, oh, no, this is 2016. I said, oh, no, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? I said, because it's not been scientifically proven. So I ignored them anyway and just carried on using it. So now it's very much recognized as a coping mechanism. So yes, so I would say to people, you know, whether you want to do a record, you know, 14,000 miles is ludicrous. You know, set yourself your own targets. Because it helps your mental state, but also you then gain confidence. So yeah, without a doubt, you know, do something, you know, push yourself. But the best thing to do as well when you do something like that is do it in stages. You know, for example, if you're going to do, I always use the London Marathon, you're going to run 26 miles and that's your objective. Don't try and run 26 miles from day one, because you probably won't be able to do it. And that it's that imposter syndrome. You know what I mean? So do it in increments. You know, set yourself 4 miles, do that. And then once you come to that, then increase it. Because then you're then growing in confidence mentally and physically as well, rather than hitting a wall from the start and then trying to pick yourself up.
You mentioned there that the charity, and you know, you've been involved in charity work, and notably with there's those images with Prince Harry involved as well. Why is charity and giving back such an important part of who you are? What does it do for you on a personal level to be able to do something like that?
I think everyone should give back, you know, if they can. You know, with my story in my book, you know, I ended up in a homeless home in Moss Side in Manchester, the roughest estate in UK. You know, and we used to have to rely on others as charities to help me and my family. So I've been there. I've been at the bottom with the receiving hand. You know, when I left the military, my passion was the guys from the military. I did a lot with the British Legion. The British Legion then helped me with my pension as well. So I've relied on these charities as well for my life. So I always then wanted to give back. So I ended up being the SBS ambassador for Scotland, you know, put a lot of money back into the SBS. I'm ambassador now for the British Legion. So yeah, because I think if everyone helped each other, then the world will be a better place, you know. But if you're in a position that you can do so, then do it. So for me, everything I do, there's also a philanthropy angle. Any challenges I do, there'll also be a narrative with it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've talked a lot today about, you know, things that are important to you, practices. I wonder for you now at this stage in your life and stage in your career, what are the sort of daily practices that you say are most important to you? It could be, you know, a fitness routine. It could be focusing on your sleep, your health, maybe mindfulness. What are some daily practices that are important to who you are and the way you function?
For me, I've touched on it, physical activity always helps. I'm not, you know, I don't have unless I'm training for another challenge. So I have a training program, but if I wasn't training for that, I'd also make sure at least do something. My wife will tell you I'm a grumpy sod if I'm not training. So I'm very conscious of that I need to stay on that physical activity. And another one is communication. You know, when I did this campaign for mental health, you know, I did it because Harry asked would I do it for this Heads Together campaign. I wasn't aware how big an issue it was throughout the whole of society. But when I was doing it, actually a lot of friends, close friends and guys in the military sort of came to me and opened up for the first time. And I was like, well, why didn't you do that before? So, you know, communication, I think people suffer on their own. I just found out a friend of mine from my old unit 5-9 passed away a couple of days ago, and you sort of look back at him and you see now in reflection, looking back, there may be cries for help there as well. So communication's key. But I understand that, you know, for men, it's a bit of an ego thing, you know, it can be a bit of a taboo talking about their mental health. But that's where physical activity comes in. You know, well, if you can't talk to someone, we'll go do something and keep active. I think a lot of guys and girls struggle as well, because when you're in the military, you've got free gym membership and things like that. And when you come out, you don't. But what's been great with COVID is the fact that you don't need a gym. You know, a lot of people going out walking, a lot of people learning how to ride bikes. You know, when it gets hard and, you know, you've got to tighten your belt, I think the gym membership's really the first thing to drop off.
Yeah. We mentioned challenges today and pushing yourself. You briefly mentioned there that you were training for something. What's next for Dean? What's the big challenge ahead of him?
So I've got a few in the back of my mind. You know, my USP, as we touched on, I'm not a cyclist. You know, compared to other adventures and challenges out there, I would take a sport or discipline I've never done before and find the biggest challenge. So the plan for this year originally was to kayak the River Nile from source to sea. It's never been done before, from Rwanda to Egypt, 4,280 miles. But obviously COVID's scuppered that. You know, COVID's put a stop to that until next year when we see the lay of the land. So that's something we'll come back to. The planning wise, you know, I've got it all mapped out and things like that. So I'll tick over that, but there's one I'm going to do next year. It's all on the hush, but it'll be here in the US. And again, this is another reason for moving over to America now is everything's been paused. So let's go over, get established, and do that. But one of the other feedbacks from the book is you are the security expert. You were one of the world leading experts. Prime ministers, presidents, royal family come to you for advice. Why are you still not doing it? So over here, I've set up a niche security industry which helps ultra high net worths, corporations, and everyone else.
We mentioned your book there. For everyone listening who may not have picked up a copy or had the chance to read it yet, what can they expect from the book? What can they expect to learn if they go out and grab themselves a copy?
It's got a bit of everything in this book. It's not just gone from the military to the TV. It's gone from the military to a whole middle section on private security, and then to the bike ride. But what they get from this book is especially in the current climate, is reinventing yourself, starting over again, and being confident. I was told I would last 2 minutes in the military. I then got to the top of, in the special forces. I then got injured. I then had to find myself in the security industry. I then got to the top within the security industry. 1 time lucky, 2 time not. We then did it again. You just then done it in cycling. You never cycled before, and then became a double world record holder within 18 months, and the first person in history to cycle under 100 days. So that's not lucky 3 times. There's a mindset in there which is transferable to whatever you do, whether it's military, whether it's corporate, or whether it's sport. And I think that's what people will learn from this book is that mindset and that approach.
Amazing. So for anyone out there who wanted to check it out, where can they find the book? Where can they find yourself on social media and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can get the book on Amazon and Audible. It's called Relentless. And you can find me on www.deanstott.com, the Frogman.
Perfect. I encourage everyone to do so. Dean, thanks so much for your time today. You've brought an incredible amount of value to the show, and I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I hope you've enjoyed your time on the podcast as well.
Yeah, I've learned a new thing, the Imposter Syndrome.
There we are. Amazing. Learn something new every day.